Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us for another ESET East Africa product webinar. Today we'll be covering ESET Secure Authentication. And before I begin, just as always, if there are any questions, please feel free to send them through on the Q&A section as we go along, and then we'll aim at answering those questions at the end of the webinar. So let's get right to it. First thing is, what is 2FA? Obviously, for those that might not know, we just wanted to explain some of these concepts to everyone. Simply put, two-factor authentication, or 2FA for short, and sometimes referred to as two-step authentication, is a way of adding an extra layer of security when accessing a system. And it's effectively done by combining something you know with something you have, which then provides successful authentication. And it also happens to be a lot more common than many people realize, and pretty much everyone happens to use it every day already. Every time you use your bank card, for example, that's actually combining something you have, i.e. your bank card, with something you know, which is your PIN number. Or when you log on to online banking, most banks these days ask for a one-time PIN that they send you via SMS in order to log in successfully or to authorize certain transactions. And then similarly, there's also the 3D secure mechanism primarily for credit cards, so that when you make online payments, you receive an SMS only upon first supplying your credit card details successfully, which is then followed by a predefined string known as a personal assurance message, which you set up when you enable or configure the 3D secure facility for your card with your bank. And the idea behind that message is basically to prove that the message has actually originated from your banking provider. And as I'm sure many of you are aware, it's already available on countless online services and providers, including the likes of Google, Twitter, Apple, Microsoft, Facebook, Amazon, Steam, PayFast, and a lot more. Lastly, there's many different types of implementations available for two-factor authentication, and these range from SMS and authenticator apps for smartphones, as well as login verification, which uses public key cryptography, which we'll cover later on, as well as hardware tokens, so physical devices that you need to carry around. So why do we typically need 2FA? Well, first off, it improves overall infrastructure security, and that's obviously an easy win for any organization. It also secures access methods like VPN, ensuring that only authorized users actually gain access to internal networks remotely. It might also be for compliance requirements like financial institutions, health organizations, or others. And unfortunately, small to medium businesses are often the weakest link, since they tend to have lower overall security when you compare them to larger enterprises. It also protects against poor password practices, because now even if it's an insecure or uncomplicated password vulnerable to a brute force or a guessing attack, the additional OTP or one-time PIN is now required to log in as well. And then lastly, of course, kind of going in line with the previous statement, is that it protects against stolen or compromised credentials, because now your credentials would need to be stolen in addition to something you normally have, like your phone or a hardware token. So first off, on all of the different methods, what are the pros and cons for SMSs? So first things first, with SMS, obviously the code is different every time. It's different from all of the other methods because they tend to be a time-based one-time PIN that is generated in the case of an authenticator app. And obviously that means that which we'll get to the con section later on, that those keys follow a set pattern based on the seeding details that were provided to you. Secondly, the code is obviously tied to your phone number, which cannot be changed or intercepted by malware running on a computer, for example. The cons of the SMS method, first of all, is obviously mobile network or provider issues, or low coverage, which may prevent or delay the delivery of the one-time PIN. And what can often happen in that scenario is your session with the login system will time out, causing you to try and log in again and then need to receive a new one-time PIN before you can actually authenticate. So that can obviously exacerbate the issue. Secondly, the number port fraud through doing a SIM swap may result in the codes being delivered to a malicious party. So that's obviously a bit of a fringe or an edge use case, because it would basically mean that the attacker or malicious party has to have someone with the network provider in question to perform unauthorized SIM swap in the first place. Then lastly, logging into a service on the same device that you received the one-time PIN, like your phone or tablet, obviously means that your one-time PIN is as much at risk as your password. So if I'm using my phone to access, say, Google, I'm typing in the password on my phone, and then I receive the one-time PIN on my phone, so obviously they run the same risks. Next, moving on to the Authenticator app. Firstly, it obviously doesn't rely on an SMS every time that you log in, and the other benefit there is that online access is only needed when you originally set up the solution. So once it's set up, it's something that stays on your phone application, and it basically doesn't go away, and it just keeps cycling through 60-second codes generally. The other benefit there is that one Authenticator app can typically be used for many different accounts or services. So you can have one app on your phone, and you can actually use that for 2FA for many different online services. And then most of the Authenticator apps that are available can be PIN protected as well. And you can essentially consider that a third factor if you'd like. Because what that means is now you first need to log in successfully with the normal credentials, then you need to open the Authenticator app, type in the PIN in order to get the code, and then supply the code to the online service before you can log in. On the con side, for the Authenticator apps, obviously, because it's a time-based code, if that seed is compromised, either because your device has been compromised or if your provider's servers get compromised, they can effectively calculate all future codes because it follows a predefined pattern. And then, of course, logging in, again, exactly the same like with SMS, and pretty much for most of the other methods, with the exception of the hardware tokens. If you obviously use the same device that you received the PIN for, or the OTP in the Authenticator app, then again, you run the same risks. Then you have the login verification. This is something that not a lot of providers use. It's most commonly used by Twitter. And it also doesn't rely on an SMS every time you log in. It also means that you can have one app that can be used with many different accounts or services, but as I mentioned, login verification is probably the least common implementation of 2FA that we're aware of. And then, of course, on the con side, again, if your private key gets compromised, obviously malicious parties can masquerade as you. So if they manage to get the key off of your systems or off of your app, then again, you run exactly the same risks as stated in the last point if you receive those details on the same device. The last implementation of 2FA are hardware tokens, right? So obviously this doesn't rely on an SMS every time you need access. It also doesn't require a phone or a tablet because it's a physical device that you carry with you. And as I mentioned there, it's an independent device. So it's always separate from your computer, your phone, and or your tablet. And I see that there's a small typo there in the first point, so apologies for that. But basically that means that you're always carrying essentially an extra device with you. So you don't run it in an app, you don't use anything else. And typically what these hardware tokens are is it's a little device about the size of a keychain, and it's got a little LCD screen on it, and you basically activate it in order to receive a code on the LCD screen that you then use as the 2FA code or token. The downside of that is obviously you can end up with a keyring full of tokens because they are not used for the same account. You have one for each account. And then, of course, they tend to carry additional costs because it's a hardware device and it's not just an app that you go and install for free off of a store, for example. It means that most of the providers that use them also don't actually issue them for free, so they carry additional charges that you need to pay for. Sometimes it's a once-off fee, sometimes it's a monthly fee. It really depends on the provider in question. And then, of course, as a scam of the week, there has been an instance of two-factor authentication text spoofing. So as we know, 2FA solutions are much better than simply relying on a username and password combination. But this also means that they're becoming targets for hacks and scams, so attackers can actually try to bypass them. So recently, a two-factor authentication text spoofing or phishing scam has actually surfaced, and it follows exactly the same method that has been used for ages, trying to fool people by providing credentials in phishing mails. And essentially what happens is the attackers tend to use credentials from compromised databases found online. Recent examples include the likes of LinkedIn, MySpace, and Twitter, or they send traditional phishing emails with malicious attachments, such as keyloggers, to have the typed credentials sent back to them. Then once they obviously have your credentials, then there's a 4-point scam that typically follows. The first point is that the attacker sends a text message notifying the user that they've detected some type of suspicious activity on the account, and that they'll be sending a code to the user, which the user then needs to send back in a reply in order to avoid account lockout. So the attacker obviously then logs into the actual account with the real credentials, which causes the real two-factor authentication code to be sent to the user, or they open their, obviously this is limited to the SMS method that we mentioned earlier. So then they get the 2FA code on their device, and now the worried target or user now tries to avoid the negative consequences such as account lockout through this scare tactic, essentially, and then sends the code back to the attacker. So now, of course, the attacker has the real two-factor authentication code, and they can actually authenticate successfully. So in summary, this effectively highlights the benefits of 2FA, and that unfortunately it's not going to deter attackers from trying to gain access to your accounts. It just means that a little knowledge really goes a long way, and namely that just like conventional phishing campaigns, never supply your sensitive information, your password, or your two-factor authentication codes to any unknown party. Next, of course, the solution here is ESET Secure Authentication, or ESA for short. Out of the box, it supports protection for Outlook web access, for remote desktop connections, for VPN connections, as well as any radius-based service. There is also an integration guide for a variety of VPN appliances or business applications like CyberRoam, SonicWall, Microsoft SharePoint, and a whole bunch of others available on the ESET website. For any other system that's not covered by the native protection that I already mentioned, you can use the API or the software development kit in order to integrate it with any of your own third-party systems. The solution is flexible in terms of how the codes can actually be obtained. So they support the Authenticator app, the SMS method, as well as the hardware token methods. And basically what that means is you basically have a variety of devices, because nowadays anyone has a cell phone, anyone can at the very least receive an SMS. So the benefit there is that you're not running into a situation where you have to have some type of smartphone or smart device in order to actually implement ESET Secure Authentication. As long as the user can receive an SMS, then you can use that as the method, or that in combination with the Authenticator app and or the hardware token. Then, of course, just like all of our products, it follows an easy-to-deploy method. And obviously, ESET Secure Authentication in particular is probably the easiest product that we have in our entire portfolio to deploy. From a pricing perspective, it needs to be pointed out that it is billed annually. And it actually works out to less than $7 per user per annum. And I speak under correction, but there's also a massive discount campaign running at the moment. I think it's about 75% off for secure authentication. So now is probably a better time than any to actually implement the ESET Secure Authentication solution because of that low price point. And then obviously, two-factor authentication isn't a new concept, so there are a few competing vendors out there, such as Secure Envoy and Intersect, but very few of them actually offer native protection for many of the apps that the ESET secure authentication does, and they're often costly and not very user-friendly during the deployment process. So that effectively wraps up the initial presentation. Just give me a couple of moments while I switch over to actually demo you the product. And while I do that, obviously, as I mentioned, please feel free to send through any questions that you might have in the Q&A section, and we'll get to answering those in a moment. So you should see the ESET Secure Authentication Management Console in front of you at the moment. This is basically just a Windows server that I've deployed alongside my Active Directory server. So I happen to not install it on the same server as Active Directory, but it's really up to your discretion on where you want to install it. And effectively what happens is during the installation, you obviously get asked for things like your domain admin credentials and things like that, so that the system can obviously make changes to your Active Directory users and computers in order to enable the secure authentication. So for the moment, there's just a few settings that I want to go through. First of all, you can obviously in the main section, by selecting the domain in question, you can see some details like license expiry, the number of users that you've got activated, and the number of SMS credits that you have remaining. So this is a trial license that we have, or an NFR license that we have, and that's why we started with 100 credits, and I've actually just used one so far in order to do a demo previously. From a basic settings perspective, I've basically called the token name ESET Africa, so that's applicable to the mobile application, which is the OTP method that I will be using in this demo. And I've also enforced the fact that users must use a PIN code on the mobile application. So while unfortunately I won't be able to show you the mobile application itself, because it obviously runs on my phone that I've got here with me separately, you can go and have a look, install it from the Play Store, or locate it on the Apple Store and install the app. And obviously, you can also contact us to obtain a trial license for ESET Secure Authentication so that you can have a look. And effectively, if I had a web application protection, that would probably be done through the API or the software development kit. And obviously, if you've got any type of radius-based authentication system, like VPN connections or whatever the case may be, you can do that through the Radius server integration. So I'm going to skip over the Radius section because we don't have that set up in our environment. What I will be showing is just the advanced settings. So at the moment, I don't have the API available, or at least enabled. What I am using is looking at the mobile number inside the Active Directory users section, so that when I try to enroll a new user or start configuring the secure authentication for a particular user, I can actually send the link so that they can go and download and install the application as an SMS straight to the phone. And that's why I actually used that 1 credit before. And then I don't have hardware tokens enabled, mainly because I don't have a hardware token. But obviously, if you've got a provider that you purchase hardware tokens through, you can enable this and configure it accordingly. Then from remote desktop perspective, I have it enabled for remote desktop on this machine. I also have enabled the ability so that even if you don't have to enabled, you may still log in. This might be useful if you're still busy deploying the solution and not everyone has actually successfully installed the app on their phone, for example. So you don't want to lock people out if they haven't completed that process. So maybe once you've deployed the solution and you're happy with the configuration for everyone, then you can disable this particular option and effectively enforce the use of the 2FA tokens across the board. So then I'll go to my Active Directory users and computers. For the illustration, or at least for this webinar, I've done it on my user. So what it does is when you install the secure authentication, it adds an additional tab on the user properties. So as you can see, I've gone through the activation section. Basically what I did is I ticked the mobile application option. I have my phone number listed in the telephone section. I then send the application, so that basically sent me a text message with a link to the Play Store so that I can go and download and install the application. I then opened the application, and then basically what I did, which I'll show you in a second, is install the client application on Windows 7 machine so that I can actually show the two-factor authentication process. All right. So this is really straightforward. It just adds this tab. You select the token types that you want to use. If you had hardware tokens, you'd be able to assign the token in question to this particular user account. And if that token obviously gets stolen, then you can revoke access as well. So then switching on over to my little demo node, this little Windows 7 machine, just to show you how quickly it is. Obviously, I'm not showing you the installation for the secure authentication server, but just to show you the client side, it's extremely straightforward. This is exactly the same executable that you would use to install the server side. I'm just going to focus on the client side right now. So I execute that. It extracts, it starts up the installation wizard. I accept the changes. It does a couple of checks. Everything is obviously successful. I move on to the next step, and this is what I was mentioning. In this case, I just want to enable remote desktop protection for this particular machine that I'm logging into at the moment. And of course, if it was a server, then I'd be installing these other components in order to provide that protection measure. I move on to the next step. It completes the installation. And now once that's done, that's literally all you need to do. I've effectively enabled two-factor authentication using the mobile application. So now if I try and reconnect to this particular endpoint with my same credentials, now you can see the ESET secure authentication logo in place, and you can see that it's asking me for my one-time password. The reason it's not asking for a password in the first place is because I happen to be using this connection manager called mremote-ng. So for this particular machine, I actually already have my username and password entered already. So that's why it's not asking me for a password. Alternatively, if I was using MSTSC in the command line, I'd launch the remote desktop application, connect to the machine, type in my credentials, and then I'd end up on exactly the same screen as over here. So I'm just opening up the ESET authentication app on my phone quickly. So let me just find that. For reference sake, I'm being prompted for my PIN code, which is securing the access to the application itself. I then select the ESET Africa token, because that's the token name that I configured over here. And now I see that my code is 754221, and I type that in, and obviously now I am authenticated successfully. So that really is how simple it is to actually add two-factor authentication to any remote desktop login session. So you can use this on your workstations, you can use this on your servers, you can obviously add VPN integration in order to protect remote access to your endpoints. And obviously, as I mentioned, you can also use the API or the software development kit. So you're not limited to any of the out-of-the-box supported platforms. You can actually add this two-factor authentication to any machine that you'd like. So I know this was a very, very quick webinar in comparison to everything else, but that pretty much wraps it up. I'm just going to give a couple of moments so that people can submit any questions, and I will actually answer that in a moment. I see there that someone was complaining about a background sound. I'm not sure what that was. I do share an office with a couple of people, so I don't know if it was the sound that you were hearing there. So I'm just going to give a couple of moments for people to send through any questions that they might want to. I see that I'm getting a question if there's a new version of ESET. Can you clarify, are you referring to the endpoint antivirus or the endpoint security product perhaps? Okay, so you're referring to the two-factor authentication. So this version that I've got installed on my environment is the current version. So if you look at the, if you just go and download it from the ESET website, you're going to have exactly the same experience that I've had. And then obviously for the mobile application, they do update that every so often, maybe if they want to change the interface or add some security updates or anything like that. So yeah, there's definitely a new version. If you want to upgrade it, another question that I'm getting is you basically just install the new one over the old one. You don't have to go and uninstall it. You just basically replace the existing version and it retains all of the existing settings. In the same sense, just like with any mobile application, you simply run the updates available from your Play Store or from your Apple Store, for example.
Yes.
Are there any other questions for anyone attending the webinar? Obviously, you can take this opportunity to maybe, if there's anything else that you want me to cover in a bit more detail, I can do that as well. So just for everyone else attending the webinar, I've got a question here asking that someone stated that they've installed a 25-user ESET endpoint with their customer, and they just want to know whether they're done or if they need to upgrade. So maybe just for clarification's sake, this is a separate product aside from the ESET endpoint antivirus and the ESET endpoint security products. So two-factor authentication or the secure authentication is a completely separate solution, and obviously it requires its own licensing. And the reason that it's not included, just for reference, is purely because obviously we don't want to bog you down with additional things that you need to install if you're not going to use it. So that's why it's kept separate.
Oh, I don't see. Okay.
Okay, so I'm getting another question asking where it is listed in the portal. As far as I know, it is on request only at the moment. It's not listed in the intranet portal at the moment. I believe that it will be added very soon. It's mainly as a result, as far as I know, is for some licensing integrations that they want to complete in order to ensure that the process is as seamless for the ESET secure authentication as it is for all of the other products that we have available.
Yeah.
So effectively for the short term, if you are interested in this and if you maybe want to give it a try, then just get in touch and we can provide you with the necessary information.
underneath that image. Oh, so you want this, but I keep that image. Okay. Underneath that image. Okay, cool. Yeah.
Okay, so I got another question here from someone asking how it can work if you can effectively install this to many different clients, obviously without interfering with the user in question. So the main thing around that is obviously because typically with two-factor authentication, you generally don't install it for every single workstation, right? Normally, let's say, for example, you've got an office. I've got, say, let's say 50 people as an example, right? Those people typically don't use remote desktop. It's generally only your IT guys or people that need to log into a pastel environment or some type of billing system. Effectively, what I'm trying to say is that the number of users that would need to use the remote desktop protection are generally few in number. So for that reason, there isn't currently a way to deploy the client side without interfering with the client machine, because you generally be doing it on your servers or for your VPN, which obviously doesn't require anything to be installed on the client machine because it integrates directly with your VPN server. And that's basically why. So for particular machines, I just happen to use a Windows 7 machine as an example, but typically it could be used for specific workstations with specific sensitive applications, or for servers that are exposed to the internet. And that's why it's a quick little process to just run the wizard instead. I've got another individual asking to send a presentation. We will be making the entire webinar video available on our wiki in the next few days. And yes, we can also send through the actual slideshow if you want that separately. So we will get in touch after the webinar. While we're on that topic, if anyone else wants the presentation, or if they would like anything else, just send us a request to our partners at ESET Africa, and then we'll get back to you. I got another request that we can send the video to your mail. We won't be doing that because we'd like to make it available to everyone on the wiki. The other reason for that is because often the videos can be quite large in file size, and most people's email providers are not going to accept the size of the email, which is why we opt to rather make it available on our wiki so that you can watch it at any time. Right, so it doesn't look as though there are any other questions coming through. I'll give a couple of moments longer just for anyone else to send something if they're interested. I got someone asking about the introduction because they unfortunately joined a little bit late. For the purposes of the recording, we won't be covering the introduction again. As soon as the video is available, then you can go through the introduction on that side. Great, so it seems that wraps it up. Thank you everyone for joining. I hope that the session was informative, albeit very short. Obviously, as I mentioned during the presentation, the secure authentication product is probably the simplest out of all of our product portfolio that you can possibly deploy, thus the extremely short webinar today. But nonetheless, as I said, I hope it was informative, and obviously get in touch if you have any queries. Thank you all very much for attending, and have a good day.